is the third largest tree in the world. It's not only the most beautiful, in my opinion, or one of the most beautiful, but the forest itself is something special. And when you think that when you you knock down a tree that is, say, 300 years old, you're destroying one of Mother Nature's most marvellous creations that you'll never see it anywhere else, except when you'd have to go perhaps to the Californian redwoods. And we've got the same sort of thing here, and we're just wiping it out.
Since the dawn of mankind, we have relied on trees for food and shelter, to bind the precious topsoil, purify our water and cleanse the air. Today in Western Australia, it's possible that our generation will be the last to see forests in their natural state.
Will all these lovely trees be cut down, sir?
No, the forest will not be cut down, only the old and unhealthy trees. The young trees are left to mature. In fact, the Forest Department surveys the forest and marks those trees which can be taken, like that one over there.
These images are reminiscent of landscapes ravaged by war. In fact, they show the result of modern timber cutting in the publicly owned state forests that cling to a small portion of the southwest of Western Australia. They are administered by CALM, the Department of Conservation and Land Management. Our unique eucalypt forests are subject to conflicting interests. On one side, there are those concerned that large areas of native forest are retained in their natural state. On the other is the timber industry, intent on exploiting almost all native forest for wood production. These two interests must share the forests, but from the beginning, the balance has favoured the timber industry. The main methods of production forestry in WA involve clear felling, or virtual clear felling. After timber companies have taken all the logs they want, from blocks of land up to 800 hectares in area, and possibly larger, the debris is burnt by CALM. This destroys most of the remaining vegetation, and much of the wildlife. The size of the blocks, and the rate at which they are cleared, are only made possible by using huge, capital-intensive machinery, which produces jobs. The waste created by logging is enormous. Much of the timber is left behind. Only some logs are taken, to be sawn into lumber or torn into wood chips. It's difficult to picture the massive scale of these operations. But imagine an area of forest the size of Kings Park being logged in a single operation. Now visualize that happening about 80 times a year. And believe it or not, the annual rate of logging may actually be increasing. After logging, these blocks are left to regrow, or are replanted by the Department of Conservation and Land Management, at taxpayers' expense, the theory being that another forest will grow. But even if it does survive disease, fires and insect attack, what kind of forest will it be that contains only same-age, single-species trees? Will wildlife that normally uses mature, mixed-aged forest be endangered? Are we creating a less diverse ecosystem? Will it be more like a farm than a forest? The answer, quite simply, is yes. The only continent on Earth that has less trees than Australia is Antarctica. In Western Australia, only about 5% of the land area was ever covered by true forest. Since white settlement, we have reduced this drastically to less than 1%. But with 4/5 of our forest lost forever, overexploitation of the remaining trees continues. In 1968, large-scale clear felling began, in preparation for the introduction of export wood chipping. By 1976, WACAP, the WA Chip and Pulp Company, now wholly owned by Bunnings, was sending Carry and Marry wood chips from this area to Japan. This new industry was proclaimed for its efficiency in using waste material from sawmilling activities in state forests. Little did we guess back then that forest waste included whole logs, and that this wonder industry would actually create more waste than it was capable of using.
The wood chip project has had a drastic effect on the forests in the main Carry belt. And in fact, you'd think for all the world that that country had been opened up to farming. There's no doubt about it. The government of the day allowed that country to be overcommitted to the timber industry. And I think they're at a stage now where they don't know where to cut next.
And what are we, the public, getting in return for sacrificing our last stands of mature forests? CALM, previously the WA Forest Department, had a net deficit of over $100 million between 1976 and 1984. Taxpayers' money, which in effect subsidised the timber industry. Compare that with the $38 million unappropriated profit made by just one timber company, Bunnings, in 1985 alone. Bunnings, which has been given first choice to approximately 85% of timber taken from state forest and dominates every facet of the hardwood timber industry in this state. Despite years of being subsidised by public money, the timber industry as a whole contributes relatively little to the state's economy and takes almost no responsibility for replacing what it uses from state forests. Wood chipping is just the final indignity placed on our overexploited forests and the public purse. Now there is a proposal to increase the destruction of native forests, this time on private property. McLean Sawmills of Denmark want to export up to 240,000 tonnes of hardwood chips per year, gained from farmland in the Denmark, Albany, Manjimup, Plantagenet and other shires, as far north as Perth. This would overlap most of the present Bunnings licence area and extend east of Albany. McLean's will require up to 5,000 hectares, about 12 Kings Parks, of Carry and Jarrah Marry forests each year until plantations, mainly of Tasmanian blue gums, are ready for wood chipping in 15 to 20 years. Virtually no plantations yet exist, though McLean's basic proposal has been around for more than 5 years. Taxpayers footed the bill for the Bunbury port facilities used by WACAP. They will be expected to do the same for McLean's at Albany, as well as paying for the upgrading of public roads. With McLean's mill less than a kilometre from the town's boundary, it's hardly surprising that Denmark residents are concerned, with such a proposal poised on their back doorstep. Most Denmark people jealously guard their unique environment. It's the reason many of them came here in the first place. They know too that this special environment brings thousands of paying tourists to the district each year. These people question why anyone would want to turn the town's major tourist attraction into wood chips.
We're down to a few square miles of forest.
They're just the last remnants. They're the pieces that weren't too easily cleared. And now there's obviously somebody who thinks they can make use of them and will probably put the land in great danger. These ones here are up in the Carry incidents, I can see that.
Woe betide those who want to stop on the bridge or stop anywhere near the bridge, the only bridge across the river anywhere nearby.
The thing is, if they have to put in extra roads, who's paying for them?
How do the kids get on? Are they scared when they go to school, Katie? Have we got
The effects on wildlife, soil and water, the danger posed by log trucks pouring in and out of town, the loss of a major source of income and the future of local employment are all vital issues.
If this wood chipping goes ahead, in my view, they are putting a nail in their own coffin. The workers are putting a nail in their own coffin because there is not the supplies available in Denmark to sustain that huge amount of timber resources.
That's right.
For wood chipping. It is not here.
How could you possibly risk setting up an industry? It's like putting all your eggs into one basket. Everything's dependent upon wood chipping. The export market has a hiccup in 5 years down the line, and the whole base of our economy is finished. There are alternatives. Things have been pointed to. There's honey production. There's already wise utilization of our timber resources. There's no fewer than 45 craftspeople in Denmark, 6 new shops in the last 2 years. If we had 1/10 of the money that has been supplied by various organizations along the way to promote wood chipping type industries, we could employ 100 people in the craft industry in the next 5 years alone. That's a promise.
And I just can't see the farmers in the area, hard pressed as they are, allowing their forest to be chopped down and then replanted again. And the comments that I've heard from people who've talked to farmers and from my conversations myself is that Gordon McLean's scheme is going to be used as a land clearance scheme. So that rather than massive new regrowth forests being set up to provide more resource in the future, we're going to have massive land clearance.
We certainly don't want log trucks thundering over the bridge, and we don't want to see the district devastated, because I think it has the finest potential for tourism anywhere that I've been in the world. And I've been overseas several times. I've been to New Zealand. I've seen quite a lot of country, and I really do believe that Denmark is outstanding. It has incomparable beauty, and that's the way we want to keep it for ourselves and for the future, and for everyone who wants to come and see it.
The creation of jobs is used as an argument by government and industry to justify the enormous cost of wood chipping, despite the fact that jobs in the timber industry have steadily declined over the past 20 years through corporate takeovers, mill rationalisation and the introduction of labour-saving machinery.
Between 1964 and 1985, the total volume of logs produced, private land, Crown land, increased by over 20%. But employment in the timber industry actually decreased by 47%. So we're using far fewer workers to take out far more wood. This is borne out by figures from new mills, employment in new mills. The new mill that they put in at Walpole employed a third the number of people that the old mill employed. This is the trend.
In Tasmania, the forest workers are now seeing this, and they're starting to worry about it because they've seen the number of jobs decrease over the years. And certainly the wood chip industry is not furnishing jobs. What it is taking jobs from the industry by taking these good quality logs and reducing them by machines into very small pieces, shipping them to Japan. And also, we are importing timber from overseas. We import about $1.2 billion worth of timber from overseas. And it makes no sense at all to ship our best timber in the form of wood chips out and then have to import other timber when we are having so much trouble with our balance of payments. So in terms of jobs in the industry and in terms of jobs, say, for the building industry and everyone else who depends on timber, the wood chip industry is a disaster.
When we think of the wood chip industry, where they're felling trees, some of them good millable trees, by millable I mean saw millable, and they can be put into the timber industry or at least into the building areas. And these trees shouldn't be chipped, because we're selling the chip at something less than $50 a cubic metre to Japan, who are creating paper and cardboard and that type of thing from it. We're buying paper back from them at something in the vicinity of $2,000 a tonne. That money difference of $1,950 could be used in Western Australia creating our own employment. At a time when employment is a thing of great concern to everyone, we're sending most of our utilisable products to Japan.
How can this happen? Well, it happens when a forest is treated simply as a kind of quarry to get value out of it, pick the eyes out of the forest, make room for transport. What isn't of the highest value is abandoned, left lying around. It happens when man's thinking is ruled as the highest value by what you might call the religion of economics. Nothing else counts except turning things into cash. And the religion of economics is the enemy of all the things that humanity really cares for. Beauty, sympathy, harmony, the harmony that used to be represented in this forest. The irony of the matter is that when economics becomes a religion, when the economic calculus is put as the highest value, the behavior of men becomes extremely uneconomic from another point of view. I see nothing but wasted resources here. Resources which very likely in the future will be sorely missed.
Today, the amount of wood being removed from forests is more than is being grown by replanting and natural regeneration. The ancient Karri giants that are being cut from the mature forest will of course never be replaced, because regenerated stands will be clear-felled in rotations of 100 years or less. The WA Forest Department was established in 1919. It was meant to caretake the state forests so that they would survive as a natural heritage and timber resource for generations into the future. Just 3 years later, Conservator Charles Lane Poole resigned in protest when the government of the day refused to allow the department to regulate the activities of the timber industry in these forests. Today, CALM appears to be a captured bureaucracy, unwilling or unable to take command of the forests, of which it has been given custody.
In 1918, this is what Lane Poole wrote. The forests of Western Australia are not the property of this generation alone, but of all generations. We have a right only to the timber that will grow during our lifetime, and it is our duty, I repeat, to hand the forests over to posterity, not only undiminished in area, but also improved in quality. We may cut the interest, but the capital must remain intact. It is the object of a forest policy to achieve this end.
Our Karri forests are managed so as to provide a continuous and increasing supply of raw material for the timber industry, which employs some 6,500 wage earners and has established over 130 sawmills, together with several complete townships in the southwest. All major sawmilling operations are carried out on a sustained yield basis with the objective of providing each sawmill and the township and community dependent upon it for a large portion of its livelihood with continuous life.
The tragic part about all this is that no conservator since Lone Pool's day has ever made any real effort to implement the sustained yield principle. We have a situation today where we can see the end of the line. We can see the end of our matured forest because we're still madly overcutting.
Well, the degree of overcutting should have been less. But of course, one of the benefits of overcutting is that this state got a very substantial stimulus to its economy. Now, what's happening now is in successive governments of both political persuasions have decided that we need to dramatically reduce the cut.
The authorities have been saying that since 1976. Yet even now, overcutting continues. At present rates, Calm concedes there will be no remaining significant carry or jarrah, except in reserves, by the year 2020.
Well, in our forest, when we cut down a tree, and I'm talking mainly about jarrah, because that's where my experience lies, roughly 2/3 of the tree are left on the forest floor. 1/3 goes into the mill as a millable log. When it goes through the mill, roughly 1/3 comes out as saleable timber and 2/3 goes into the burner. Now, the mill in Nannup presently burns approximately 330 tonnes of jarrah each day, mill waste.
After a millable jarrah tree is felled, the limbs and branches, the stump, and often part of the lower trunk are discarded and left on the ground. Only about 1/3 of the volume of the wood in the tree reaches the sawmill. Of this, about 1/3 becomes sawn timber. In the case of a typical marri chip log, there lies a supreme irony.
For a start, the chip mill will only take marri logs greater than 3.4 in length, whereas the Nannup mill will take 2.1 in length. And so that's immediately a tremendous difference, considering that the chip mill was designed, or so we're told, to accept forest waste, and that was its main use. Charcoal is something that is quite unacceptable to the chip industry, and many logs that have been through, or many forests that have had a hot fire, will have charcoal type logs, and these are often not easy to pick up until you've cut the tree down. These are things that the sawmilling industry can accept.
Big automated mills are inefficient in recovery of sawn timber. Small mills, on the other hand, have to do much better.
The log in a large mill would be cut out like this, and basically this section here would be all waste. A small mill, we start up in one corner and take out the corners, and when we got down to this line here, we would still keep cutting timber out of these pieces and then out of there. We'd take sections out everywhere, right up to the waste, and sometimes we cut through the waste and just sort out the waste from the good wood after it's sawn instead of removing that section up front. Basically we've been forced to do this in the past because of the fact that we have to be more efficient at paying higher royalties for logs and selling the timber cheaper. The main problems is low utilisation and low recovery by larger mills that have first choice on our resource at below market value prices.
Royalties on timber from state forest are set by the government. Recent increases have set the price for first-grade carry saw logs at $15.37 per cubic metre. Dressed carry can fetch around $800 per cubic metre. While prime saw logs are so cheap, second-grade and salvage logs, which can still yield useful quantities of sawn timber, have so far rarely been taken by Bunnings. But CALM makes them available to the Bunnings-owned WA Chip and Pulp Company for wood chipping, at the low rate of just $10 per cubic metre.
Here we are in this state. We're blessed with two particularly beautiful timbers that I use a lot in my profession. That's Jarrah and Carry. Yet we haven't even got the foresight for the next generation to be able to look at this timber as a valuable resource, use it wisely and nurture it. Here we are devoting, chopping down existing forests, turning them into chips, and then wasting our time growing more trees, turning them into chips. What a ludicrous situation to turn potential saw logs into wood chips.
It's a very short-sighted thing that the local timber operators like Bunnings actually are carrying out, because sure, it looks good. The bottom line profit over the short term looks pretty good, but of course it's ruining their resource in the future. The industry has told me that they are planning to get along without big saw logs. They're going to, if you want big timber, they're going to laminate. They're going to make things up onto little pieces, because they're recognizing that with the present wood chip regime, which is basically just clearing off all the big logs and then you have a regrowth of smaller material, we simply don't have the big saw logs that are coming out of the forest now. We won't have them. They're 300-400 years old. We simply will not have access to that timber. So they're cutting their own throats, the timber companies, in the long term, but of course they're greedy. They want the short-term profit.
Forests contain a resource far more valuable than timber, fresh water. They stimulate rainfall and prevent salting of streams and soil. When trees are removed en masse, the water table rises, bringing salt with it.
And so we've got a very, very salty landscape, one of the saltiest landscapes in the world, and one which needs very careful management if you are going to remove the trees. And our learning about the problem of salinity in Western Australia has been a rather slow process. Now, in a landscape that is naturally adapted to having trees on it, you can quite imagine that once you clear, you're going to cause soil problems.
The Denmark wood chipping proposal involves native forests on farms in areas already affected by salinity that is making the land unproductive. The Denmark town water supply contains more than 3 times the salt of Perth's drinking water.
My daughter has a florist shop in Denmark. She sells plants. She is unable to water those plants from the Denmark River. She has to cart and carry rainwater to water those plants because the plants all die. This is a shocking state of affairs.
Salt claims over 15,000 hectares of WA farmland each year, and not just in the wheat belt. Of the 15 major watercourses in the southwest, only these 4 presently contain less salt than the World Health Organization's recommended maximum of 500 parts per million. But for how long?
If you're going to keep salt out of this district on the south coast here, the high country is going to have to keep its vegetation, and that's the main problem I see with the wood chip plant, is that the wood chip plant wants to use the timber on the high country because that's where the red gum and the carry and the other species they're interested in are. So that if, for instance, if people up the valley here decide to take wood chipping on as an option, they might well not have the problem. The problem could arise here or further down the valley. You see what I mean? So that in this salt, once you start land clearing, you've got to think about the whole land forms in a community, not just in specific blocks of farms.
While traditional farming practices continue to yield annual income with relative security, many farmers are sceptical about converting land to plantations for wood chipping. The economic risks are too high, the promises too vague. Other primary producers, too, fear the adverse consequences of such a proposal.
1978 was a fairly historic year for West Australian viticulture in the form that just about every vineyard in its early beginning stages lost large amounts of fruit. Ourselves, we lost 60%. A lot of other growers lost more. The larger vineyards lost a lot less. And this was basically due to bird damage which came from the silver eye which is a very small bird which lives basically on the red gum blossom.
Red gum, or marri, is a prime target for wood chippers. Wine growers from Margaret River to the Parongarups are now planting back marri to divert birds from their valuable crops.
Any wine grower would support me in saying that, as far as we can see, there is no value in doing anything to the red gum. He's extremely important to the wine industry in Western Australia.
Forest blossom also supports the beekeeping industry, which has already suffered decreasing honey yields due to the forest's decline. The blossom of a regenerated karri forest, for example, is not ready for honey production for at least 40 years. One major fear is that Maclean's proposal will lead by default to increased clear felling in state forest. If remnant native forest on private land is exhausted before plantations mature, where will the wood chips come from? A similar plan floated by Bunnings in the Manjimup area has seen only 125 hectares of plantations established in 4 years.
With a new wood chip industry starting, we're promised that it will only take a resource from private property, but once it gets going, they've got an investment, they've got people employed, there's a tremendous pressure to keep the thing going, and when the resource on private property runs out, as I think it must, then there'll be an enormous pressure on whatever government to let that industry keep going using state forest and even reserves. I remember when a mill closed on the south coast, there was local pressure to let that mill continue by logging a resource in national park, and even the national parks are under pressure, even though they're our most secure form of reserve. They can be changed by Act of Parliament, and a government so minded could tough it out and alter the legislation and hand even national parks over to logging. I think that is some indication of the power of the timber industry, the power of the timber lobby to get its will, and its will is to cut every area, or virtually every area of forest containing old karri and marri and jarrah trees, every area in the state, even national parks.
The government states that it holds more than half the karri forests in reserves, but the status of many of these can be changed by CALM without parliamentary approval. The pink dots on this map indicate flora and fauna reserves, the green areas national parks. These are the only reserves relatively safe from the chainsaw. Shown against the state forest, it's obvious that very few of these reserves lie in forested areas. In fact, less than 6% of karri forest is in national parks.
I'm not sure that there are enough reserves even contemplated. I'm not sure that there is anything of any significance, say, between Walpole National Park and the reserves in the forest north of that, and the Parongarups.
Here we are on the popular tourist route to Moon's Crossing on the Warren River. Now, what we have here is a road reserve which obviously has been removed. Now, these reserves were set up as a condition of allowing wood chipping to occur in the first place, where they were to leave unbroken corridors of forest along roads for aesthetic reasons, along rivers to preserve the purity of the water, and also to give the wildlife unbroken corridors of forest which were to link up with conservation reserves.
An important point to remember about the road, river and stream reserves is that while they are counted in this 50% of the karri forest in reserves, they are in fact already being logged. So that gives you some indication of how insecure these reserves are. On the one hand, we're told that they're part of the reserve system of the karri forest. On the other hand, they are actually being clear-felled right now.
Now, we sign world conservation strategies, we sign national conservation strategies, and we develop our own state conservation strategies which says that we're going to preserve natural ecosystems. Well, we can't preserve natural ecosystems and exploit the forest as well.
Tourism offers a dynamic future for development and jobs in the southwest. But while mature forests, particularly of majestic karri, are whittled away, so too are the attractions for visitors.
A lot of people express a disappointment that there aren't more big trees around. Many of our regular visitors, we have people who have been coming down for 30 and 40 years from Perth, and there's an emerging concern that the forest that they knew is disappearing. Now, CALM seem to stick to the story that they're growing magnificent new regrowth forests. Well, that may be so from a production timber point of view, but as a person in the tourist industry, relating daily to tourists, it's not good enough. We've been sending people to see what a 100-year-old forest looks like and to make a comparison to virgin forest. We have yet to find one tourist who found any comparison to virgin forest. That's what they want to come and see. That's the original face of Australia, and that's what tourists come to a country to see.
I've been involved in introducing and taking people to the Karri Forest for 15 years now. One of the things that has struck me is that almost without exception, the people that, whether they're introduced for the first time or they're coming again, the depth of the experience of walking or whatever, just being in the Karri Forest is tremendous. There are very few other environments that have that sort of immediate impact on a person. The ability to sort of reinvigorate you, to lift your spirit and so on. And equally, when the same people, if we're driving to an area, we come across a clearfell area, there's a sense of loss. It's not the fact that there's any doubt that trees can be regrown there at some cost, but something's missing, and it's a reflection of the fact that you can't recreate virgin Karri forest.
Greater access to state forest for timber users other than loggers and wood chippers will create opportunities and employment for a wide range of labour-intensive industries.
We set up a small exhibit here to try and demonstrate the different usages of our precious forest resources. We've got half a ton of wood chips here, and we've got half a ton of fine quality furniture. We've got in Denmark, just this small town alone, we've got 10 wood craftsmen. They're using just about every wood that you can imagine: tingle, red gum, banksia, she oak, jarrah, and karri. All this wood is supposed to be rubbish. Well, you can see for yourself and make that judgment whether it is rubbish or not. We have a red gum bench here. We have jarrah. We have a truck here which incorporates about 5 or 6 different local woods. We've got a spinning wheel here out of she oak, and banksia, which no one's even considers as a wood that's able to be utilized. Well, there it is.
The quarry mentality that says, if it grows, cut it down. If it's in the ground, dig it up and export it, ignores viable forest-based enterprises that do not destroy forests and which add value to the raw material. They create jobs and take the pressure off the hard-put inhabitants of our forests, the unique birds, animals and wildflowers that help create the complete forest, and whose survival depends on the survival of the forests themselves. There are 90 endangered species of wildlife in WA, 3 times more than in any other state in Australia.
The 2 types of birds that will be definitely threatened with clearing would be the birds who depend on hollows for nesting, and without nesting you lose your species, just as simply as that, they're gone. And the felling of trees, if you think that you can grow a tree with a hollow in it to make provision for hollow nesting birds, well, it'll take something like 150 years to develop hollows. The other species that are greatly at risk are the honey eaters. And we only have honey eaters because we have this incredible flora, this nectar-producing flora. So, well, that's it in a nutshell. If you want to keep this diversity of birds, you must keep the bush that's left.
In order for Mother Nature to do its job as it has done for aeons past and supply all the birds, the animals, and complete the ecology of the area so that it survives itself, we've just got to make provision for nursery trees. These trees that the Forest Department refer to as over-matured and useless. There's nothing useless in nature, nothing goes to waste.
Wood chipping in its present form can only exist while clear felling continues. And clear felling is a grossly wasteful exploitation of our forests. It cannot be justified morally, socially, or in the long term economically. Before we accept the half-truths of the forest industry's glossy television commercials and the propaganda of its full-page newspaper advertising, we should remember the native forests of WA are the only ones of their kind on the entire planet. They don't belong exclusively to conservationists, tourism operators or scientists, nor do they belong just to the timber industry, the politicians or the Japanese pulp mills. They belong to you and me, and more than that, to those who come after us. We must all make the last stand, and make it together. And we must make it now.